It was a quiet afternoon in a small, unassuming diner, its counterstools polished by decades of patrons, sunlight drifting through dusty windows, and the hum of distant conversation mingling with the scent of strong coffee. In walked a man in his 80s, his steps measured, the soft shuffle of worn boots telling of years and miles traveled. His uniform, though faded, bore the quiet weight of history, of duty carried through decades. He had come, as he always did, for a hot coffee and a moment's peace. This man was an 81-year-old black veteran, a figure of quiet dignity, not seeking recognition or applause, but simply a seat to rest his bones and warm his hands. The door behind him swung again. A biker swaggered in, leather jacket gleaming, attitude louder than the engine of his machine out front. He scanned the room, smirk already curling into place. Eyes landed on the veteran near the window. Something in his posture prompted insolence, a cruel impulse. Without a word, the biker's open hand lashed out, slap across the veteran's cheek. The sound cracked sharply, carried by the hush that fell like a blanket over the room. The old man's head jerked to the side. Coffee splashed. A porcelain mug teetered. Gasps hovered on the lips of startled patrons. But still, no one moved. The veteran, dignified even in that moment of violence, did not collapse nor cry out. He remained still, only his hand unconsciously brushing the burn of humiliation across his face. For a full minute, the room held its breath. Then, he rose slowly, his knees trembling, not from pain but perhaps from the gravity of being struck, not for refusing to fight back, but for being a reminder of something inconvenient. He fixed his coat, winced at the stiff ache behind the slap, and with a silence, heavier than any shout, he walked out. 22 minutes later, the hum of a distant rotor brushed past that sleepy town, insistent, thrilling, unavoidable. Through the large glass windows, shadows moved. Soldiers in formation emerged, disciplined, resolute. A Black Hawk helicopter descended, cutting through stillness. Boots hit the pavement. Tactical gear moved in orchestrated unity, folding into a protective ring around the man who had been struck. He sat on the curb, head tilted upward, not in fear but in unspoken acceptance that something was changing. At the center strode a figure who carried more than rank, he carried legacy. His posture calm, voice low and steady as he knelt beside his father, the veteran. He brushed his fingertips lightly across his father's cheek, gesture tender, resolute. "Dad," he said. That single word carried decades of shared memory, love, regret, and pride. Not an accusation, not a cry for revenge, but a recognition that what had happened was unacceptable. Time slowed for the biker. He shook as though woken. The room's air thickened with realization. He had slapped not just any old man but a soldier, a father, a hero, and, now, the army itself stood sentinel. "Which one of you struck a veteran?" The voice cut through the stunned hush, measured, calm, demanding respect. The biker stepped forward, arrogance draining from his voice as he stammered excuses. But the soldier, his son, spoke again, each word deliberate. "He served this country while you were learning to fear your own shadow." There was no threat in his tone, only authority, the kind that doesn't shout but compels compliance. 2 minutes later, police arrived. They saw the veteran seated on the curb, unbowed. They saw the soldiers braced in protective formation. They saw the biker, stripped of bravado, cuffed, caught between shame and the immovable presence of justice. The veteran's son crouched again. "You okay?" he asked softly. His father nodded. "I've had worse," he replied, voice flat, but resolute, layers of pain and pride beneath each syllable. The crowd began to stir. A waitress emerged, trembling, offering a clean napkin. Her eyes wet, she whispered, "I'm sorry, should have done something." Others followed, heads bowed, voices soft, mercies belated but earnest. Veterans among them rose, some in silence, stepped forward from shades of obscurity into quiet solidarity. One by one, they stood beside the old man, shoulder to shoulder, a line of unseen strength made visible. This was no performance. There were no cheers. Only recognition, finally, of the quiet courage of those who have served and still serve in civilian clothes. Evening arrived. Word spread. The video, and varnished, powerful, traveled faster than the rotor's hum. National news picked it up. Headlines didn't just recount the slap. They told the veteran's story. 81-year-old black Vietnam veteran struck in diner. Son Colonel leads army response. His record, multiple deployments, commendations earned in a nation long uncomfortable seeing black heroes. Town officials offered apologies, community groups launched vigils, but it was the veteran's son who offered the most potent message when he later spoke quietly at a small gathering. "He didn't ask us to show up, but we did because dignity never retires, and we answered every call to protect it." A plaque was unveiled in the square where the incident occurred. It read simple words, incised deeply, "In honor of a soldier's dignity. Justice for one, hope for all." On slow Thursday afternoons thereafter, the veteran once more walked past that square, this time greeted with nods, waves, and sometimes respectful salutes. Children stopped to ask about the man who taught them what courage looks like when it rests in quiet resilience. Inside the diner, life moved forward but differently. Waitresses greeted him now, sliding his coffee across the counter with reverence, where before, there was indifference. A teenage boy, once wide-eyed and hesitant, leaned in to ask what it was like in the army. The veteran, lifted by respect long overdue, replied simply, "Pride always pride." The night after the incident, the veteran sat alone in his modest living room. The hum of a ceiling fan overhead mingled with the muffled sound of the local evening news now carrying his face, his name, and the story he never asked to be told. His coffee sat cooling on the table. He wasn't a man who sought attention. In fact, he had spent most of his life trying to blend quietly into the background. But now, he was in the center of a conversation that reached far beyond the walls of that diner. His son, Colonel Marcus Williams, entered, with the steady presence of a man used to commanding both respect and silence. He closed the door gently, taking a seat across from his father. "You sure you're all right?" Marcus asked again, his voice low, careful. The old man nodded, but Marcus knew the truth. His father had been hurt, not by the slap alone, but by what it represented, the same prejudice and disregard he had faced decades earlier in uniform. "You know," the veteran began, his gaze fixed on the dark window, "when I came back from Vietnam, I wore the same uniform I wear today. I had medals on my chest, and still, I couldn't get served at certain places. People looked at me and saw only my skin, not my service." He paused, exhaling slowly. "I thought those days were behind us." Marcus leaned forward, the weight of his father's words pressing on him like armor. "Dad, we fight those battles differently now. That man didn't just disrespect you, he disrespected every soldier who's ever worn the flag, and we don't let that go unanswered." The days that followed saw the small town transformed. Veterans groups traveled from neighboring states to stand on the diner's steps in quiet solidarity. Motorcyclists who respected service not mocked it trode in from miles away, engines rumbling like a protective wall. The sheriff's office released a statement, confirming the biker faced charges for assault on an elderly person and hate-motivated violence. Reporters camped outside, but the veteran declined every major interview. He didn't need headlines. He needed something deeper, restored dignity. One afternoon, he finally agreed to speak, but not to the press. Instead, he went to the local high school auditorium, where a history teacher invited him to share his story with students. The room was full, teenagers shifting in their seats, their curiosity tinged with the impatience of youth. The veteran took the stage slowly, leaning on his cane. He began not with the slap, but with his life. The farm where he grew up, the segregated schools, the draft notice that arrived on a damp spring morning in 1964, the battles fought overseas, and the battles fought at home. "When you wear a uniform," he told them, "you swear to protect a country that isn't always ready to protect you back, and you do it anyway. Because service is about the people beside you, the ones who count on you, the ones you'd give your life for even if you don't look the same." The students listened in silence now, their restlessness replaced by something heavier. When he finished, the applause was not loud but long, lingering like the moment itself refused to end. Meanwhile, Marcus had his own mission. Through his military network, he arranged a gathering at the base, just outside town. He invited his father not as a guest, but as an honored elder. The day came with a sky so blue it seemed ceremonial. As they drove through the gates, rows of soldiers, black, white, Latino, Asian, stood at attention. Their salutes rose as one. The old man, taken aback, removed his hat slowly, his eyes glistening. It wasn't the medals or the applause that moved him, it was the unbroken line of respect. During the ceremony, Marcus addressed the crowd. "My father taught me that courage isn't always about charging into fire. Sometimes it's about standing in the quiet and refusing to bow your head when someone tries to take your dignity. What happened in that diner was an act of hate. But what happened afterward, this, right here, is the answer." The veteran stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of years, but also the clarity of a man who had nothing left to fear. "I forgive that man," he said simply. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. We must remember so it doesn't happen again. Not to me, not to any of you." The crowd stood, not in a burst of applause, but in a solemn rise that said more than clapping ever could. Over the weeks, the incident faded from headlines, but it did not fade from the town's memory. The diner kept a framed photograph of the veteran at his favorite booth, next to a small plaque, reserved for those who've served. The owner, once indifferent, now greeted him with a hand over her heart, and sometimes a stranger would quietly pay his bill without a word. The biker, meanwhile, faced the consequences in court. Witnesses testified. The judge, stern and deliberate, handed down a sentence that included community service specifically, working with veterans outreach programs. It wasn't just punishment. It was a forced confrontation with the humanity he had denied in that moment of cruelty. Months later, the veteran returned to the same diner on a winter morning. Snow fell lightly outside, the kind that made the world seem softer. He sat at his booth, sipping coffee, when a man approached hesitantly. It was the biker. He stood there, stripped of the arrogance that once clung to him, eyes lowered. "Sir," he began, voice unsteady, "I came to apologize. I didn't see you that day for who you are. I was angry at the world, at myself, but I took it out on you. I'm sorry." The veteran studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about you deciding who you're going to be from now on." The biker nodded, swallowing hard, before walking away. That night, the veteran sat in his chair again, watching the news quietly. This time, it wasn't his own story. It was a feature about a new scholarship fund for local black students, started in his honor by community members. His son had spearheaded it. The old man smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from knowing that, while you can't erase the past, you can plant something better in its place. And so, life went on. But something had shifted, not just for him, not just for his son, but for the town itself. Respect had taken root in a place where indifference once lived, and the 81-year-old black veteran, who only ever wanted a quiet cup of coffee, found himself the quiet center of a story that proved dignity, once defended, can change more than a moment. It can change a community.